Are you enjoying your vacation?
All I could do was stare blankly at my father-in-law's question over the phone. I couldn't say anything, and my father-in-law thought that was strange. I can't tell him that I'm in misery. I can't tell him that my husband and mother-in-law are always taking advantage of me. What should I do? How can I get out from this miserable position? How can I get back at my mother-in-law and husband? I decided to tell him the truth. I can't hold it in any longer on my own, so I'll tell my father-in-law the truth about what has been happening. Then, I will accept whatever happens. I made up my mind and said these words to my father-in-law. My name is Amanda. I'm a housewife in my 40s. I live with my husband and in-laws. My mother-in-law would verbally abuse me and say terrible things to me ever since I married her son. My father-in-law warned her every time, but nothing would change her attitude.
You thieving cat. You are such a fool to fool around with people's husbands and sons. Get out of my house. I don't want to live with you anymore.
My heart was already in tatters before she even said those words to me. And yet, I managed to get through it all because my father-in-law supported me.
Amanda, you're always working so hard. You are really helpful to my son and wife. I'm sorry if my wife treats you so poorly. I wish that my wife knew your charms.
I loved my father-in-law so much for his kind words that I felt like he was my real family. I was forced to live with my in-laws soon after our marriage, and my mother-in-law continued to verbally abuse me, so my father-in-law's words were a great help to me. My relationship with my mother-in-law was only getting worse, but I was able to get by because my father-in-law was on my side. Even if my heart was falling apart, my father-in-law's words could fix it, and that is why I was able to survive. My husband did not take my side at all. Rather, he took his mother's side.
It's your fault for not listening to my mom,
he would say. My father-in-law used to scold my husband for that. My father-in-law was always dignified, and I was proud that he was my family. Even though it was hard, I managed to get through each day. Then one day, my mother-in-law suggested that we go on a trip. My mother-in-law and my husband wanted to stay at my father-in-law's villa. My father-in-law is not much of a traveler and prefers to stay at home. He had inherited the villa from a family member, and although he cleaned it regularly, he left it half empty. I have visited the villa many times to clean it, but it is a magnificent house with many tourist facilities around it. I thought it was a waste to just maintain it and not use it. But I didn't like the idea of going there with just my mother-in-law and my husband, so I told them to at least let me stay at home. But she insisted and said,
No, you can't do that. I'm thinking about having a barbecue with my son. If you aren't there, who's going to set it up? Besides, we're going to have to take the car to get there, and we won't be able to enjoy ourselves if you don't drive.
My mother-in-law is trying to treat me as if I were a housekeeper. I wasn't going to stand there and say nothing when my mother-in-law said that. Do you think I would like to go on a trip if you say that to me? If I'm going on a trip, I want to have fun too. If I have to go just to make you and your son happy, I don't want to go.
You're such a cocky wife. In times like this, you should shut up and listen to what I say. Don't you have any desire to serve your in-laws?
Even if you say that,
you know, a wife doesn't have a right to refuse. Just go and ask my husband for permission.
After that, no matter what I said, my mother-in-law wouldn't listen to me. I called out to her and asked her to listen to me, but she ignored me. I knew I couldn't resist any longer, so I had no choice but to talk to my father-in-law.
A trip? That sounds nice. Amanda, you should go and have a relaxing time.
My father-in-law, who knew nothing about the situation, said that with a kind smile on his face. I wanted to tell him what Beth said to me, but I knew if I did that, my parents-in-law would be put in a tough spot and I would feel guilty about it. I didn't want to do that, so I held my feelings in, smiled at my father-in-law and said, "Thank you." My father-in-law told me to tell him if I had any problems, but I was too afraid to say anything because I was afraid of ruining the relationship between my parents-in-law and myself. The day of the trip seemed like a chore. I was already wishing the trip would be over as soon as possible. On the day of the trip, my husband and mother-in-law were excitedly talking about the destination, and we had to depart early in the morning before the sun had risen. That alone was hard enough, but I was also the one driving. My mother-in-law and husband were soundly sleeping in the back seat. I rubbed my sleepy eyes as I drove on, as I felt hatred for them. When we arrived at my father-in-law's villa, my mother-in-law asked me to buy supplies for a barbecue. I told my mother-in-law that I had been forced to drive for a long time and had not been able to get much sleep, so I told her to let me rest.
"A wife's duty is to listen to me. I won't allow you to disobey."
She would say that. On top of that, my husband said,
"If you go against us, we can leave you in the mountains right now."
Since my father-in-law was not here to protect me from them, I reluctantly decided to go to the supermarket, which was quite a distance away, by myself. After struggling to carry all the ingredients, which was too much for the three of us to eat, I was told to get ready for the barbecue. Apparently, although we had the equipment, we hadn't used it for several years, so we needed to clean it, replenish what was missing, and make other preparations. I was left to do all of that, and I had to prepare the tools while looking up things I didn't understand on my phone in one hand. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law and my husband were still relaxing in the villa. They were lounging on the sofa, not thinking about my feelings, and saying things like,
"I'm looking forward to the barbecue,"
or,
"I can't wait for the preparations to be finished."
It was still cold outside, and even though I was wearing warm clothes, it was still cold. I rubbed my numb hands together and tried my best to stand the cold as I finished the preparations. And then, my mother-in-law and husband finally came out.
"Finally! Well, my son and I will do the rest, so you can go inside."
"What? I thought we were having a barbecue."
"Yes, but just me and my son. You'll have to prepare your own meals. Okay, bye."
And then my mother-in-law went with my husband. They started barbecuing without me. They made me do all the preparation, but when it came to start, they left me behind. In addition, I had to make my own food on my own. I was tempted to resist such unreasonableness, but I held my ground and returned to the villa. I was able to spend the rest of the day relaxing in the room I had been assigned. However, the next day, I was summoned by my mother-in-law again.
"We're going to a famous national park."
My mother-in-law and husband talked about it excitedly. "I see. Then I'll go get ready." When I said this, my mother-in-law said to me,
"There's no need. You're staying here. My son and I will be going to the park."
Beth laughs as she says this. My husband agrees with my mother-in-law, saying,
"Nice idea."
I was happy that I didn't have to go out with them, but I still felt a little disappointed. My mother-in-law and husband left me alone in my room. My husband and mother-in-law took the car. The villa is in the mountains, so there is nothing to do nearby for entertainment. I was so bored on this trip. While I was killing time in my room, I received a call. It was from my father-in-law. "Hello?" When I answered, my father-in-law said he had called because he was concerned about my situation.
"Are you enjoying your vacation?"
My father-in-law asked me in a voice filled with anticipation. I didn't know what to say to him. Should I honestly tell him that I was lonely and alone in my room because my mother-in-law and husband had left me there? Or Should I tell him that I was so bored and I couldn't even enjoy the barbecue? Wouldn't my father-in-law be depressed by such a statement? I had been rebelling against my mother-in-law and telling her off, and things had gotten so bad between my parents-in-law. I could see them struggling with each other at every turn, and it was unquestionably my fault. And if I told him more and made things worse between my parents-in-law, he would have to endure even more pain. With this in mind, I couldn't say anything. And my father-in-law thought that was strange. "Did something happen?" he asked me in a gentle voice. Every time he asked me this, my heart would shake and I wondered if I should just tell him honestly what was going on. I was at the end of my patience. I could no longer endure the harassment from my mother-in-law and husband. I don't want them to abuse me anymore. I made up my mind and decided to tell my father-in-law everything. I was told to stay at home since I'm just a maid. When I said this, my father-in-law goes, "Huh? Amanda, what do you mean?" Exactly what I said. They only brought me on this trip so they can make me do all the work and chores while they relax. My father-in-law was stunned by my words. Even over the phone, I could tell he was heartbroken. I didn't want my father-in-law, who has always been so kind and caring to me, feel this way. But I was at my wit's end. I told my father-in-law everything that had happened since we came to the villa. And my father-in-law says, "I can't believe them. How could they be so rude to you and not appreciate everything you've done for them?" He resented them. And then he continues to say, "I'll get in touch with my wife right now. I'm sorry, Amanda, but can you wait a little longer?" I nod at my father-in-law's words and hang up the phone. Sometime later, this time, my husband called me.
Hey, what the hell are you doing? Why did you snitch on us to my dad?"
Even over the phone, I could hear the anger and impatience in his voice. He probably got a good scolding from his father. I did what was obvious. After what you and your mother did to me, it's only natural that this happened.
What do you have against us? Do you enjoy doing things that destroy people's families?
You say that as you don't continue to destroy my life every day. My husband fell silent when I said that. I guess he had nothing to reply with. You've taken it this far, and there's no way you can continue to have a marriage in the future. I don't know how to say this here, but let's get a divorce. I can't deal with you two anymore. Now, my husband is getting impatient.
"I'm sorry. I was out of line. Please don't tell me you're divorcing me. We need Amanda. Please reconsider."
You don't need me. You need a good housekeeper. It's not me that my husband and mother-in-law want. They want a housekeeper who will not disobey them, who will treat them as they are treated. It's not my job, and there's no way anyone would do that for me. Two people who are selfish in every way. But that ends today. If this story goes smoothly, I'll be free from those people. I couldn't help but dance in my heart at the thought of that. I guess I couldn't stand to see my husband become silent when dealing with me. I heard my mother-in-law's voice on the other end of the phone saying, "Give it to me." Amanda, what's the meaning of this? Do you enjoy bringing my husband into things he doesn't want to be a part of and ruining our relationship? That's what my mother-in-law yells at me in a loud voice. I would have been frightened of her before, but now that the divorce is imminent and the day when I will be free from my mother-in-law is near, I am no longer afraid of her at all. It's your fault for being so selfish. If you had treated me more respectfully, none of this would have happened. I've always thought you were too cocky, even for a wife. When I became a wife, my mother-in-law treated me more harshly.
But I worked hard every day. You don't have the guts. That's why I'm trying to train you.
Isn't that a bit old-fashioned nowadays? Why do we have to fight each other as a family? Why can't we cooperate with each other when we can do something? I don't think you and I are on the same page. I can't put up with that and still be a family.
You won't make it anywhere if you're like that. You think you can talk to your mother-in-law like that when you're a good-for-nothing wife?
I'm getting a divorce, so it doesn't matter. My mother-in-law is always nagging at me. But who does she think she is? All she ever does to me is force her values on me and tell me I'm not doing things the right way. She just kept complaining about my bad attitude and how I didn't deserve it. What part of that is training? I had no idea. I didn't need to deal with them anymore. With that in mind, I decided to pack up my belongings and go to the nearest bus stop. If I could get to the station, I could at least go back to my parents' house. I didn't want to get caught up in my mother-in-law's and husband's selfishness any longer. Well, I'll be leaving now. When I tried to hang up the phone,
Hold on. I don't care what happens to you after this.
my mother-in-law starts to yell in a panic. Pretending I didn't hear the howl of a loser, I hung up the phone, packed my bags, and get ready to leave. I had never felt so light-hearted when I came here. And it was there that I finally recognized that this villa was surrounded by a beautiful nature. After that, I went back to my parents' house and started preparing for the divorce. Fortunately, my father-in-law introduced me to a lawyer he knew. However, my mother-in-law and husband refused to grant me a divorce. On the contrary, they were making some incomprehensible claims, saying,
If you pay us now, we'll forgive you and you can come back to us.
there was no way I would pay to be sent back to that horrible environment, since it would not benefit me in any way. Even so, they persisted in their insistence, and I was consulting with a lawyer to see what could be done about it. Then one day, I got a call from my father-in-law. He told me that they were both insisting that they really wanted to see me. My father-in-law said there was no need for me to go, but I didn't want to cause him any more trouble, so I decided to meet with them in the presence of my lawyer. The place was a private room at a fancy restaurant that my father-in-law had prepared for us. He said he would pay for everything. I arrived early and was waiting in the room when my mother-in-law and husband entered the room.
What the hell are you doing here? You never came home? And now you want me to pay alimony? Is that what you do to family?
Yes, we are family. How can you do such a terrible thing to us as a family? You're a terrible wife. Heartless.
You both talk to me so terribly. No one but my father-in-law has ever treated me like family. And they both have done so many horrible things to me. Why should I be the only one to be blamed? I didn't know what to say to them. So I just sat there, with my head down, and my father-in-law said,
Will you cut it out?
He raises his voice.
I thought you came here to apologize to Amanda. But when you actually came here, all you did was to criticize her. And you didn't even apologize. What the hell did you guys actually come here for? Was it not to apologize?
My normally mild-mannered father-in-law speaks as if he's dropping thunder onto them. My father-in-law does not like to fight, so I had never seen him yell like this before. I could only tell that my mother-in-law and my husband were also not used to it. That's how angry he was. My father-in-law was so angry at me for my sake. Seeing my father-in-law like that made my eyes burn. Perhaps because my father-in-law told him to do so, my husband put his hands on the ground first to apologize. My mother-in-law, seeing this scene, tried to stop him by saying,
Hey.
But my husband continued to speak. regardless of my mother-in-law.
I'm really sorry. I will change my mind from now on. So please come home. I can't survive without you.
With these words, my husband told me of the devastation in his parents' home. My father-in-law had given up on my mother-in-law and husband and moved out. And my mother-in-law and my husband had to live together in that big house. But what awaited them there was a hellish life. My mother-in-law, who no longer had anyone to take her frustrations out on, began to turn to my husband first and foremost. Now, my husband is forced to do all kinds of housework in addition to his work. And when he gets tired and can't do something, he gets yelled at by his mother. When I took a closer look at him, I could see that his face was indeed exhausted. He had dark circles around his eyes, and his lips were chapped. I could tell that he was in a lot of pain. My husband has always been scared of me, and I'm sure it must be hard for him to live with his mother snoring at him every day. My husband desperately asked me to come home, as if he wanted to be released from such a life as soon as possible. As if to stop him, my mother-in-law opened her mouth.
You are such a wicked woman, not only for my husband but for my son as well. It was a mistake to let him marry you.
My husband seemed to be frightened by the sound of my mother-in-law's voice. My husband was begging me to come home, and my mother-in-law was cursing me, saying,
You bastard!
If I agreed to come back, I would have to live in hell. Who would want to live like that? I have no intention of returning. I'll do everything in my power to make the divorce happen.
No, please.
My husband desperately pleads to me. Looking at me makes me feel bad for him, but it doesn't change how horribly he treated me. I won't bend on my decisions no matter what he say. Is that all you have to say? I don't want to waste any more of my time, so I'm going home. I said this, and my father-in-law nodded as if giving permission to leave. With that, we leave the private room of the restaurant. My husband yelled, "Wait!" and it echoed throughout the room. I had recorded what happened at the restaurant, so I decided to submit it to my lawyer to be treated as evidence. Since the unusual behavior of my mother-in-law and my husband was well recorded, the divorce was granted without incident. Afterwards, Frank divorced Beth and disowned Raymond. My ex-husband moved out of Beth's house to get away from her. According to a mutual friend of my ex-husband's, his mother has worn him down so much that he can't work and was admitted to a clinic. Beth continues to live in her house, but she can't pay the utility bills, and the house is already famous in the neighborhood for being trashed. What I did may have damaged the relationship between my ex-in-laws, but still, I am able to live as I am after the divorce. And it was not by my own efforts alone. I have been seeing my ex-father-in-law quite often since then. He often treats me to dinner. He says it's an apology for all the trouble he caused me. Frank has always helped me, and I have nothing against him. But I had decided to take advantage of his kindness. He's going to take me to a nice sushi restaurant next week. I was looking forward to that day.